Valentina Petrovna glanced at her watch. It was 11:30 p.m. The train was already pulling up to the platform. The Red Arrow was preparing for another night trip from Moscow to St. Petersburg. The conductor adjusted her uniform jacket and went out to meet the passengers. November was cold, even for Moscow. 5 young people were the first to board the 7th car. The boys helped a girl with a heavy bag. They laughed and joked. Students, you could tell right away. Valentina checked the tickets. Seats 33 to 42. Third class, lower and upper berths. Before we begin the story, please write which city you are from. We are very interested to know where you are watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. Thank you, Aunt Valia, smiled the dark-haired boy with glasses. Can I ask for some tea later? Of course, dear. I'll bring the samovar after we leave. A girl was hanging up coats. She was blonde and pretty, about 20 years old. The other guys were fussing with their luggage. 2 of them looked alike, brothers probably. Another one was tall, with a scar on his chin. The train departed at midnight sharp. Valentina walked through the car, checking the documents of the other passengers. Everything was in order. The students were already playing cards and talking quietly. Well-mannered young people. At 1 o'clock in the morning, she brought them tea and bagels. Alexei, the young man with glasses, thanked her for the refreshments. He told his friends something about the institute. Elena was reading a magazine. The brothers Igor and Sergei were discussing their plans for the weekend. Dmitri was writing something in a notebook. Are you going to a wedding? Asked Valentina. Yes, a classmate is getting married, replied Elena. He lives in St. Petersburg now. That's wonderful. The world is your oyster when you're young. But something was bothering the experienced conductor. 30 years on the railroad had not been in vain. Her intuition told her that something was wrong. Trains had been stopping too often lately, not according to schedule. They said it was technical problems. But in reality, at 1:30 in the morning, the train conductor walked through the cars. He was checking something and talking to someone on the radio. His face was tense. Valentina wanted to ask him, but he hurried past. The students were still awake. They were quietly talking about something. Alexei was showing his friends some papers. Dmitri studied them carefully. Elena made more tea in a travel mug. Are you sure about this information? Valentina heard a snippet of conversation. Absolutely. I checked it 3 times. Then it needs to be published immediately. What were the young people talking about? Valentina listened, but they fell silent. Alexei neatly folded the papers into a folder. At 2:30, the train passed the Tver station. According to the schedule, it was not supposed to stop. Valentina noticed the students looking out the window. The lights of the city flashed by. They should have reached Bologoye soon. But at 3 in the morning, the train suddenly began to slow down. Valentina looked out the window. There was nothing but forest. No station. The train stopped in the middle of the taiga. The conductor walked down the aisle again, this time with unfamiliar people in plain clothes. What's going on? Valentina asked. A routine check. Don't worry. But the conductor began to worry even more. In 30 years of service, she had never seen checks in the forest. The strangers walked to the 7th car. Valentina followed. Documents for inspection, one of them said to the students. The students obediently took out their passports. Alexei clutched the folder with his papers more tightly. Elena looked warily at the inspectors. You need to get out for additional inspection, said the second stranger, but we're not late for anything. Dmitri objected. "This is a mandatory procedure. It won't take long." The students looked at each other. They gathered their things. Valentina watched them until they left the car. She didn't see them again. In the morning, the train arrived in St. Petersburg, right on schedule. Valentina went around the car, tidying up the bedding. Seats 33 to 42 were empty. "Where are those students?" asked the train conductor. "They got off at Bolog. One of them was sick." "Did you make a note of it?" "Of course." But deep down, Valentina knew something was wrong. The train hadn't stopped at Bolog, and the check in the forest had been strange. Very strange. A week later, the parents of the missing students came to her home. They cried and begged her to tell them the truth. Valentina repeated the official version, but her eyes were filled with tears. The case was handed over to the investigators. But in 1997, it was a formality. Adults had the right to disappear. The police threw up their hands. The parents did not give up. They put up posters and contacted newspapers. But the traces of the 5 friends seemed to have vanished into the November night. Then, in December, something happened that made everyone believe that the students were alive. Alexei's mother received a letter. It was an ordinary envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of all 5 friends. They were standing near a wooden house. They looked alive and well. On the back of the photo was written the date, November 18th, 1997, 2 days after their disappearance. An expert confirmed the authenticity of the photo. There were no signs of editing or forgery. But where the photo was taken and who sent it remained a mystery. The parents' spirits were lifted. It meant that their children were alive. It meant that there was hope. They went back to the police and showed them the photograph. The case was reopened, but to no avail. Years passed. Hope gradually faded. Parents grew old. Some died without ever learning the truth about their children's fate. Officially, the students were listed as missing. Valentina Petrovna Sidorova retired in 1999. Until her last day, she was tormented by remorse. In 2001, she died of a heart attack, taking the secret of that November night to her grave. Or not the whole secret? Who could have made 5 students disappear without a trace? The answer will shock you. Mikhail Krylov received this case in 2003. He was a private detective with 20 years of experience in criminal investigation. Dmitry Leonov's parents hired him as a last resort. "The police have abandoned the search," said Dmitry's mother, "and we can't live without answers." Krylov studied all the case files. The contradictions were immediately apparent. The conductor claimed one thing. The station attendant at Bologoye claimed something completely different. And the photograph from November 18th wouldn't leave him alone. The detective's first step was to interview the railroad workers. Many had already retired or changed jobs. But some remembered that night. "The train definitely stopped," said Switchman Petrov. "I saw it with my own eyes." "Where exactly?" "About 10 kilometers before Bologoye, in the forest. I thought there had been an accident." Krylov found the place on the map. It was in the middle of the taiga. The nearest village was 15 kilometers away. Why would anyone stop the train there? The detective drove to the forest. He looked for traces of an old stop. The rails had long since been replaced, and the sleepers had been renewed. But the locals remembered something. "There were cars there," said Hunter Vasily. "They arrived at night, with police numbers." "Are you sure about the numbers?" 100%. I was poaching at the time. I was hiding from the police. So the stop was planned, and police officers did indeed arrive at the train. But why? And what happened to the students? Krylov returned to studying the documents. He looked through the train schedule for November 1997. The Red Arrow was 47 minutes late that night. The official reason was technical difficulties. The detective found the train driver. Igor Semenovich Volkov was a retired security guard. He lived in a communal apartment on the outskirts of Moscow. "I remember that train," said the old railwayman. "We were ordered to stop at the red signal." "Who gave the order?" "The train conductor, and he got it from the dispatcher." "Was it a scheduled signal?" Volkov paused. Then he sighed heavily. "No, it was unscheduled. There shouldn't have been any stops like that." "What did you see next?" "Cars pulled up. Some people got out. Some were in uniform, some were in plain clothes. Then they gave the signal to depart." "How many people did they take away?" "I didn't see. I was sitting in the cab." But Krylov understood that the engineer knew more than he was saying. There was fear in the old man's eyes. The same fear that the conductor Sidorova had shown before she died. The detective tried a different approach. He began to study the crime reports for the Tver region for 1997. Maybe some familiar names or circumstances would turn up. And he found something. In December 1997, a burned-out car was found in the woods near Tver. It was a dark blue Vaz 2107. The license plate numbers had been filed off. There were traces of blood on the back seat. The examination showed that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. But DNA analysis was not yet available at that time. The case was closed as a car theft followed by arson. Krylov requested all the materials on the burned car. The site was located 20 kilometers from a railway stop. Too close to be a coincidence. The detective went to see the investigator who had handled the car theft case. Captain Sergei Nikolaevich Muravyov had since been promoted to lieutenant colonel. He worked in the regional department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. "It's an old case," said Muravyov. "I don't remember anything special about it." "Did you check for any connection with the disappearance of the students?" The investigator's face changed. He became wary. "What connection?" "The students disappeared on a train. The car was burned by poachers. But there was blood. Poachers are people too. They could have been injured." The conversation ended with nothing. But Krylov noticed how nervous Muravyov was, and how quickly he wanted to end the conversation. The detective decided to dig deeper. He began to study the personal files of the transport police officers who were on duty that night. Most of them were already retired or dead. But one turned out to be interesting. Viktor Leonidovich Kravtsov. In 1977, he was a senior lieutenant in the traffic police. He was on duty in the Moscow-Tver district. After the students disappeared, he received an extraordinary promotion and a transfer to Moscow. Krylov found Kravtsov's address. He lived in a nice apartment in the center of the capital. Officially, he was retired due to length of service. But he clearly wasn't living on a pension. The detective began to follow the former police officer. He was cautious, but did not suspect he was being watched. He met with people in expensive suits and drove a late-model foreign car. One day, Krylov followed Kravtsov to a restaurant on Tverskaya Street. He met with a man in his 50s. The conversation was tense. Kravtsov was arguing something, waving his arms. The detective tried to eavesdrop on the conversation, but to no avail. However, he did manage to take a photo of the other man. He then ran the photo through the databases. Anatoly Viktorovich Rybkin, former GRU colonel. In the 1990s, he was involved in private business. He had connections in the transport industry. Another thread. Krylov began digging into the connections between Rybkin and the transport police. and he stumbled upon some interesting facts. In 1997, Rybkin owned several freight companies. Officially, he transported construction materials and food. Unofficially, he transported anything for good money. Rybkin's companies had contracts with the railway for the transportation of special cargo. The documents did not specify what exactly was being transported. Krylov realized he was getting closer to the truth. But he needed direct evidence. He decided to talk to Kravtsov directly. The detective approached the former police officer at the entrance to his building. Kravtsov was startled at first, then tried to leave. But Krylov was persistent. "I know about your meetings with Rybkin," said the detective. "I don't know anyone named Rybkin. And about your shift on the night the students disappeared." Kravtsov's face turned pale. "The students went to Bolog. That's the official version. That's a false version. The train stopped in the forest. You were there." Kravtsov wanted to leave, but Krylov blocked his way. 5 young people disappeared without a trace. Their parents still don't know the truth. "I have nothing to do with it." "You do, and I'll prove it." Kravtsov turned abruptly and quickly walked to his car. But the detective remembered his face forever. The face of a man who knows a terrible secret. The next day, Krylov received a threatening phone call. "Stop digging, detective. It's for your own good." "Who is this?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we know where your daughter lives." Krylov hung up. The threats meant one thing. He was close to his goal. But now his family was in danger. The detective copied all the case files. He hid the copies in a safe place. He gave the originals to a lawyer with instructions in case he died. A week later, Krylov was attacked near his home. 2 unknown men in masks beat him up and took his briefcase with the documents, but they didn't kill him. "This is the last warning," said one of the attackers. Krylov realized that the game had become too dangerous. He made a difficult decision. He closed the case and left Russia. His family was more important than justice. But before leaving, the detective met with the parents of the missing students. "I know who did it," he said. "Viktor Kravtsov from the transport police. But I can't prove it yet." "Why?" asked Alexei's mother. "Too many influential people are involved. The case is being covered up from above." The parents cried. Knowing the name of the killer and not being able to bring him to justice was a particular form of torture. Krylov left for Canada in 2004. He got a job as a private detective in Toronto. But the case of the 5 students would not let him go. He continued to gather information from afar. He followed Kravtsov online. He kept in touch with the parents of the missing students. And in 2018, something happened that no one expected. A search party found a backpack with Alexei Morozov's documents in a swamp near Tver. And then the personal belongings of all 5 friends. The case was reopened. Kravtsov was called in for questioning, and he finally spoke. "Yes, I was there that night," the former police officer confessed. "But I was only following orders." "Whose orders?" "From above. From the leadership." "What happened to the students?" Kravtsov fell silent. Then he said quietly, "They were killed, all 5 of them." "Who killed them?" "Rybkin's men. But the order came from more influential people." "What kind of people?" "I can't say. I have a family." Even under investigation, Kravtsov was afraid to name the real people who had ordered the killings. The fear was too deep within him. But the most important thing had been said. 5 students had indeed been killed. They were killed on that November night in 1997 in a forest near Tver. Why were they killed? The truth turned out to be worse than anyone could have imagined. Alexei Morozov worked as a lab assistant at the Kurchatov Institute of Atomic Energy. He worked evenings to pay for his studies. It was a typical student story in the 1990s. But in October 1997, he accidentally saw something that changed his life and led to his death. The institute was preparing containers of radioactive waste for shipment. Officially, they were being sent to a special storage facility. Alexei was helping to prepare the accompanying documents. "That's strange," he said to a colleague. "According to the documents, we're sending 10 containers, but they're only taking 7. It's none of your business, student. Just do as you're told." But curiosity got the better of him. Alexei began to closely monitor the shipments, and he discovered a strange pattern. Every week, some of the containers disappeared from the official documents. Instead of being buried, they were sent to an unknown destination, and in the paperwork, they were listed as disposed of. Alexei realized that radioactive materials were being stolen on an industrial scale. Someone was making millions selling uranium and plutonium. The student began secretly copying documents. He photographed delivery notes and copied container numbers. He collected evidence of the crime. By November, he had accumulated a whole folder of compromising materials. Alexei decided to pass them on to the press. But who could be trusted with such information? The choice fell on Dmitry Leonov's friend. He worked part-time for the newspaper Moskovsky Novosti and specialized in investigative journalism. "This is treason," said Dmitry after studying the documents. "Radioactive materials could fall into the hands of terrorists. That's why it needs to be published. People need to know the truth." Dmitry agreed to write an investigation, but he needed to check the facts and find additional sources. That took time they didn't have. On November 14th, Alexei noticed he was being followed. An unfamiliar man in a gray coat was standing guard outside the institute. The same man followed him on the subway. "They've spotted me," Alexei told Dmitry on the phone. "We need to leave Moscow immediately. Petrov's wedding is tomorrow. Let's go to St. Petersburg together. We'll wait there." On November 15th, the 5 friends boarded a train. Alexei took a folder with documents with him. He planned to give them to journalists in St. Petersburg. But they were already waiting for them on the way. Viktor Kravtsov received orders the day before the student's departure. Colonel Rybkin called him personally. "There are witnesses on the train. 5 students from Moscow State University. They must disappear." "What do you mean, disappear?" "Forever, and no traces." Kravtsov understood that he couldn't refuse. He had been working for Rybkin for a long time. He covered his cargo shipments and ensured the unhindered passage of containers. The plan was worked out in advance. The train would be stopped by a false signal. The students would be taken out on the pretext of a document check. And then, at 3 in the morning on November 16th, the Red Arrow stopped in the forest. 2 cars pulled up to the carriages. 4 men in transport police uniforms got out. "Documents for inspection," Kravtsov said to the students. Alexei instinctively clutched the folder to his chest. But he did not resist. His friends obediently followed the police. They were put into cars and taken into the forest. There, a 3rd car was waiting with Rybkin's men. Professional killers. "Where are the documents?" the leader asked Alexei. "What documents?" A punch in the stomach made the student double over. Elena screamed in horror. "The documents about the uranium containers? Hand them over." Alexei remained silent. Then the killers grabbed Elena. They put a gun to her head. "The documents, or she dies first." "Okay," Alexei whispered. "In my backpack, in a folder." The leader took the documents and flipped through the pages. He nodded to his men. Now they're useless. The students were shot in the back of the head. Elena was the last. She managed to whisper a prayer. The bodies were loaded into a car and taken to a swamp. There they were buried in peat bog. Their personal belongings were scattered around to cover their tracks. One photograph was left behind on purpose. It was a picture of 5 friends standing next to a wooden house. They added a caption after the fact and sent it to their parents to make it look like the students were still alive. Conductor Sidorova was ordered to write in the log that the passengers had gotten off at the Bologoye station. The woman obeyed, but her conscience tormented her until she died. The documents with the evidence were destroyed. Radioactive materials continued to disappear from the institute. Money flowed into the pockets of the organizers of the scheme. For 21 years, the crime remained unsolved. The students' bones rotted in the swamp. Parents died without ever learning the truth about their children. But in 2018, the peat in the swamp dried up due to abnormal heat. Searchers found Alexei's backpack, then other things. An examination showed that the remains had been in the ground for more than 20 years. DNA confirmed the identities of the victims. The case was reopened with renewed vigor. Kravtsov was called in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. But when investigators showed him photos of him with Rybkin, he broke down. "I was just following orders," he repeated. "I didn't want to kill them. But you did. Not me personally. Rybkin's men did the shooting. And what did you do?" "I provided cover. I made sure no one interfered." At the trial, Kravtsov was sentenced to 15 years in a strict regime prison for complicity in the murder of 5 people. He was already 68 years old. Rybkin was arrested a month after Kravtsov's sentence. The former GRU colonel did not admit guilt. He claimed he had not killed anyone. "I was in business, transporting goods." "What kind of goods?" "Various. Construction materials, food." "Radioactive waste?" "I don't know what you're talking about." But the documents found during the search spoke for themselves. Contracts for the transport of special containers, correspondence with foreign buyers of uranium. Rybkin was sentenced to 20 years, but the investigators understood that he was not the main organizer. The scheme for stealing radioactive materials was too large-scale for a private individual. Behind it were people from the upper echelons of power. Officials from Minatom, generals from the special services. But it was not possible to prove their guilt. The documents were classified. No witnesses were found. And those who could tell the truth preferred to remain silent. The parents of the deceased students received compensation from the state. 1 million rubles for each child. The money did not bring their children back, but at least it eased the pain a little. Alexei's mother did not live to see the verdict. She died a month before the trial. Her heart could not withstand the 21-year wait for justice. Elena's father moved from Moscow to a village. He said he couldn't bear to see the place where his daughter had lived. He erected a monument to her 5 friends in his yard. The Volkov brothers were buried in the same cemetery. Their parents brought flowers every week. Until their deaths, they blamed themselves for letting their children go to St. Petersburg. Dmitri's family set up a fund to help relatives of missing persons. They considered it the best memorial to their journalist son. In 2020, journalists attempted to write an investigation into the uranium trade in the 1990s. But the material was not published. Censorship banned it. Too many influential people could have suffered from the revelations. State secrets proved more important than human lives. Detective Krylov followed the trial from Canada. He was glad that Kravtsov got what he deserved. But he understood that justice had not been fully served. The real people who ordered the murders went unpunished. They continue to live in luxury on blood money. They may still be trading weapons or radioactive materials. 5 friends died for the truth, for trying to tell people about a state crime. They were killed as enemies of the people, even though they were patriots. Alexei could have kept quiet and lived a peaceful life, but his conscience would not allow him to turn a blind eye to theft. Dmitry could have refused to write the investigation, but his duty as a journalist proved stronger than his fear. Elena, Igor, and Sergei could have chosen not to board the train, but friendship and loyalty led them to their deaths alongside those they loved. Their story is a lesson for all generations. It is about the price of truth in a country where power is more important than justice. It is about the courage of young people who were not afraid to say no to corruption. But the main lesson is different. Crimes against innocent people are exposed sooner or later. The truth always comes out. The swamp cannot keep secrets forever. It took 21 years to find justice for 5 students, but it was found. It may not be complete, but it is justice nonetheless. Kravtsov is living out his last years in prison. Rybkin is also behind bars, and a monument to the 5 friends stands in the center of Moscow. It reads, "To Alexei, Elena, Dmitry, Igor, and Sergei. They died for the truth." Every year on November 15th, people come to the monument. They bring flowers and light candles. They remember those who paid with their lives for trying to tell the truth. What would you do if you found out about a state crime? Would you remain silent for the sake of safety or risk your life for justice?